Indeed, I am going to talk about both Cambridges, Cambridge, Massachusetts, and Cambridge, England. And this is a small part of a longer project, a book titled Cambridge Pragmatism, that will aim to show how the Cambridge pragmatism in Massachusetts influenced what I heretically call the Cambridge pragmatism in England. That is Frank Ramsey and Wittgenstein. So let's begin with Cambridge, Massachusetts. In the 1870s, Charles Sanders Peirce, William James, Chauncey Wright, who no one has heard of these days, but who is very, very good, and some others started a short-lived reading group in which American pragmatism was born. Peirce says it was half ironically, half defiantly called the Metaphysical Club, for their intention was to bring metaphysics off from its airy perches down to earth. Concepts such as belief and truth must not be, in Peirce's words, and the PowerPoint really is for the quote so that you can follow along nicely. So concepts such as belief and truth must not be, in Peirce's words, vagabond thoughts that tramp the public roads without any human habitation. He argued that our philosophical concepts must be brought down to earth and linked to human experience and practice. William James, part of that Metaphysical Club, a member of it, became America's most well-known academic, both in philosophy and in psychology. He was famous, or perhaps infamous, for seeming to argue in a paper called The Will to Believe that if the hypothesis about God's existence is necessary for my success, for my having a better life, then I can take it to be true. Russell and Moore in Cambridge, England, were appalled by this idea and by James's more general statements in his 1907 book, Pragmatism, along the following lines. So this is James, his general view of truth. Any idea upon which we can ride, any idea that will carry us prosperously from any one part of our experience to any other part, linking things satisfactorily, working securely, simplifying, saving labor, is true instrumentally. And then the kicker is that James says that satisfactorily means more satisfactorily to ourselves, and individuals will emphasize their points of satisfaction differently. To a certain degree, therefore, everything here is plastic, i.e., truth is a plastic, elastic concept. Russell wrote something on pragmatism every single year from 1908 to 1912. And his objections seemed to be the death knell for the pragmatist account of truth. In a review of James's book, Pragmatism, he says that the book is like a bath with hot water running in so slowly that you don't know when to scream. Russell set the tone for how modern philosophy understands pragmatism. He said, this is pragmatism. A belief is to be judged true insofar as the practical consequences of its adoption are good. James seems to define truth, that is, as what is useful, and this is what makes Russell want to scream. Charles Sanders Peirce and Chauncey Wright, on the other hand, were not famous American academics. They were personally problematic characters, and having never managed to secure academic jobs, they were to die almost unknown in America and abroad, except to a few fellow geniuses who saw what there was to be seen in them. In Wright's case, that was Darwin. So Wright and Peirce were both scientists as their day job and sat and wrote philosophy into the wee hours of the morning. And Darwin saw that some of Wright's work on evolution in its early stages was very, very good, and actually had some pamphlets published in England. In Peirce's case, it was the young Frank Ramsey who saw that Peirce was very, very good. And Ramsey died before his 27th birthday after laying the ground for subjective probability theory, for game theory, after inventing 2 branches of economics, 2 branches of mathematics, and making real advances in truth theory and logic. And as I say, he died in 1930, just before his 27th birthday. Should make us all feel a little like underachievers. The story of how the young Frank Ramsey in the early 1920s got his hands on and his mind around Peirce's work is fascinating. But here I'm just going to give it in a sentence. It's that C.K. Ogden, Ramsey's mentor from the time he was a schoolboy and an English don in Cambridge, had a wealth of material of Peirce's given to him by one Lady Victoria Welby, an independent scholar who was one of the few people in the world who had access to Peirce's works, who corresponded with him. That material of Welby's that Ogden got now sits in Ramsey's manuscript remains, and we can see how carefully he read and made notes on it. Had Ramsey lived longer than 27 years, pragmatism's fortunes, I suggest, would have been very different. For at the time of his death in 1930, he was working on a book titled On Truth that would have delivered what I think is the very best version of pragmatism. Ramsey is usually taken to be a straightforward redundancy theorist who shared his methodology and his aims with Russell and the Tractarian Wittgenstein. But Ramsey did not think that truth can be eliminated by asserting the sentences of which it's predicated, nor did he think that we need to analyze genuine propositions into their logically simple elements, which would then correspond or mirror reality. As Ian Rumfitt, who I see is in the audience, puts it, everyone knows that F.P. Ramsey had a theory of truth. Rather fewer people know that the theory came in 2 significantly different versions, and that the later and less famous version is more fertile than its predecessor. That later version, I submit, is Peircean pragmatism. So let's take a look at Peircean pragmatism, at Peirce's views of meaning, belief, and truth. Peirce also thought that his friend James's view of truth was no good. It amounts to the following, he said. Oh, I could not believe so-and-so because I should be wretched if I did. James was very nice to Peirce. Peirce died lonely and hungry in a freezing cold house and without a job, and James passed the hat around for him, and James dedicated the will to believe to his dear friend Charles Peirce, to whom he owes much, and that was Peirce's response. Peirce's version of pragmatism started from the idea that if we want to understand a concept that is already in use in our language, it's pointless to try to define it. A definition, he thought, is only good for those who haven't encountered the concept before. But while a definition, and also the ability to pick out objects that the term refers to, retains some importance, the vital task, Peirce thought, is to get leverage on the concept or a fix on it by exploring its connections with practice. That's his pragmatic maxim. If you want to understand a concept, you need to get leverage on it or a fix on it by exploring its connections with human practice, with how we use and employ the concept. He applies this pragmatic maxim to the concept of belief first, and he arrives at the view that a belief is in part, and in part only, that upon which a man is prepared to act. Beliefs are habits of mind, which are good or otherwise, or safe or otherwise. This is an absolutely critical passage or set of tidbits from Peirce's work. A belief is in part that upon which a man is prepared to act. Habits of mind, which are good or otherwise, or safe or otherwise. Peirce argues that a second constitutive part of element of belief, in addition to that, is that a belief must be responsive to experience or evidence for or against it. A belief that isn't sensitive to the facts isn't a belief at all, but some other kind of mental state. He says, it is one of the essentials of belief, without which it would not be belief, that a man could hardly be considered sane who should wish that although the facts should remain lamentable, he should believe them to be such as he would wish them to be. That's a poke at William James, and it's an insistence by Peirce that a belief be sensitive to the way things are. He thought that James failed to see this. Peirce has a very broad account of experience, or a very broad idea of how it is that things are. When a hypothesis is about the world, when a belief is about the world, then it needs to be responsive to the usual kinds of observation and experience. He thought the hypothesis about God's existence is about the world, or at least some bit of it up there, and so it needs to cash out in empirical experience, not in whether or not it makes my life go better. So Peirce says, if you believe that God exists, that's an existence claim, and that belief, if it's not to be empty, or one of those vagabond thoughts that tramps the public road without any human habitation, it needs to cash out in empirical experience. But Peirce also had a view about mathematics and logic cashing out in experience. And he thought that that experience could be had in diagrammatic or proof contexts, where we manipulate proofs or diagrams and come to surprising observations. And Peirce had, at the same time as Frege, developed a quantified first-order predicate logic and second-order as a set of very complicated diagrams that you could then literally make experiments on. Peirce also applies the pragmatic maxim to the concept of truth and arrives at a view that is distinct from James's view, which is that truth is what's useful. Peirce first argues that the correspondence theory of truth is missing the dimension that connects the concept of truth to human practice and action. It fails, he says, to make the concept of truth readily comprehensible. How could we aim at getting a truth like correspondence truth, which goes beyond experience or beyond the best that inquiry could do? How could an inquirer or a believer adopt a methodology that might achieve that aim? So he thinks that the correspondence theory is perfectly good as a nominal definition of truth. One of those definitions is perfectly okay if you've never encountered the concept before, but we need to provide a pragmatic elucidation as well, an account of the role the concept plays in practical endeavors. And Peirce thinks that that role is as follows. Those who inquire, believe, or assert something commit themselves to having that belief be responsive to reasons and the force of experience. They commit themselves to aiming at getting things right, at avoiding mistakes, and at improving their beliefs and theories. He does not think that whatever works nicely here and now for you or me is true. He thinks that when you look at the practices of inquiry, you find that the theory of truth needs to do justice to the objective dimension of human inquiry, to the normative dimension of human inquiry. That is, when Peirce suggests that true beliefs, and this is his famous suggestion, are those which there would be agreement on at the end of inquiry, he requires that agreement to be warranted by how things are, whatever that amounts to in this, that, or the other domain of inquiry. So when we ask how truth is linked to our practices, Peirce says we find that a true belief is one that would be indefeasible or wouldn't be improved on or would never lead to disappointment or would forever meet the challenges of reason, argument, and evidence. In that sense, a true belief is the belief we would come to were we to inquire as far as we could on a matter. So that's a whirlwind tour of the pragmatism of Charles Sanders Peirce. A belief is a disposition or habit to behave, and those beliefs have to be sensitive to how things are, and if a belief really would stand up to all the evidence and argument, then it's true. So let's look at Ramsey's pragmatist account of belief and truth now. So now we move from Cambridge, Massachusetts to Cambridge, England. In 1926, Ramsey wrote two important papers, Truth and Probability and Facts and Propositions, both heavily and explicitly threaded with Peirce's thoughts. Ramsey adopts the Peircean view that belief is a disposition to behave. He says that his belief that the Cambridge Union is in Bridge Street doesn't flicker across his consciousness very often, but it's frequently manifested by his turning that way when he wants a book from the Union Library. He says he goes there habitually without having to think. It is this pragmatist account of belief that leads Ramsey to the result for which he's most famous, the idea that degrees of belief can be measured by how we act, especially in betting contexts. And these habits, or beliefs, Ramsey argues, are judged in terms of whether or not they lead to success. Hence, he sees himself putting forward, he says, this is from Truth and Probability, a kind of pragmatism. We judge mental habits or beliefs by whether they work. And he's right. That is a kind of pragmatism. The following are Ramsey's words in Truth and Probability, but as Ramsey sees, they could just as well have come from a page of Peirce's. We have, therefore, to consider the human mind and what is the most we can ask of it. The human mind works essentially according to rules or habits. We can therefore state the problem of the ideal, i.e. of the true, as what habits, in a general sense, would it be best for the human mind to have? Yep, that's a kind of Peircean pragmatism, all right. So I keep hammering that home because it's just such heresy to suggest that, that in Cambridge, England, pragmatism reigned supreme. So Ramsey says we're looking for habits or beliefs that are the best for us to have. And how do we determine that? Well, we evaluate habits in terms of whether they work in some robust sense of work. So it's important to see that Ramsey is just as wary of James's pragmatism as are Russell, Moore, and Peirce. He worries that James seems to hold that someone could think that Shakespeare's plays were written by Bacon and that someone else's opinion that Shakespeare wrote them might be perfectly true for him. And this is an actual example out of pragmatism. Russell hammers away at James, wanting him to deny that, and James goes all mealy-mouthed and doesn't deny it. But Ramsey thinks that such absurdities, absurdities like the Shakespeare and Bacon absurdity, form no part to the essential pragmatist idea, even if they constitute its chief attraction to some minds, i.e. James's. In that book manuscript on truth, he gets the issue just right. He begins, this is a long example that I'm breaking into 3 parts. To say a man believes in hell, and again, he's addressing James, really. To say a man believes in hell means, according to the pragmatists, that he avoids doing those things which would result in his being thrown into hell. So far, so good for the pragmatist. This is just the dispositional account of belief that Ramsey shares with them. Right? What is a belief? A belief is acting in a certain way. Ramsey continues, such conduct will be useful to the man if it really saves him from hell. But if there is no such place, it will be a mere waste of opportunity for enjoyment. Right now, I'm sitting in the King's College archives in the Ramsey papers, and let me tell you, Ramsey took every opportunity for enjoyment that he could find. This is a point that Ramsey also makes in the paper Facts and Propositions, where he says the belief that P will be useful only if P. In that paper, Facts and Proposition, he argues that if a chicken believes that a certain caterpillar is poisonous, it abstains from eating that kind of caterpillar on account of the unpleasant experiences associated with eating them. That's the dispositional account of belief. But the Peircean pragmatist says, he says is correct, i.e., that the actions were such to be useful if and only if the caterpillars were actually poisonous. So it's the same point there. Okay, so back to the hell example in On Truth. But besides this primary utility, there are other ways in which such conduct, abstaining from actions that might get you thrown into hell, may or may not be useful to the man or others. The actions from which a belief in hell would cause him to abstain might bring disasters in their train, either for him or for others, even in this present life. But these other consequences of the belief, whether useful or not, are clearly not relevant to truth. William James included explicitly these further kinds of utility and disutility, which must obviously be excluded if pragmatism is to have any plausibility, and thought that the truth of the belief in hell depended not on whether hell in fact existed, but on whether it was on the whole useful for men to think that it existed. What is ludicrous, Ramsey says, is not the general idea of pragmatism, but the way in which William James confused it, especially in its application to religious belief. We'll come back to this Jamesian view later at the end of the paper. Ramsey is aware that although he has not used the word correspondence in setting out his position, he says it will probably be called a correspondence theory of truth. But he says that we cannot describe the nature of this correspondence. Correspondence theories cannot cope, for instance, with the belief that Jones is a liar or a fool. How do we construe the either-or fact that he is a liar or a fool? What kind of world on the correspondence theory has disjunctive facts in it? Or, for that matter, universal facts, or negative facts, or modal facts? In another draft, of that book, Ramsey says that his view is superior to the correspondence view because it is able to avoid mentioning either correspondence or facts, two philosophically problematic notions that he saw his friends, Russell and the Tractarian Wittgenstein, trying to grapple with. He asks what the correspondence relation between a belief and the world might be. Does a belief resemble the world? Such ontological accounts of truth, which single out a particular kind of entity as the one required to ground the truth of any belief or statement, do not make good on their promise to set out in a clear way how a proposition might get the world right. Ramsey is anyway, even notwithstanding all those problems about the correspondence definition of truth, he's anyway set against the project of defining truth. He wants to link truth with action and use without reducing it to action and use. So again, in perfect step with Peirce, Ramsey thinks that the correspondence idea, that like the correspondence idea, pragmatism gives us one element, he says, of the analysis of what it is to truthfully assert a proposition. He says neither pragmatism nor correspondence are simply to be mocked at. They are in perfect harmony, he says, with his account of truth. Ramsey died before working out his account of truth, leaving us with a tantalizing remark at a crucial point. Wanted, note on Peirce. But we can see that he was already very much on the same page as Peirce. When we assert or believe P, we commit ourselves to acting on it. It's the first thing we commit ourselves to. We commit ourselves, Ramsey says, to meeting the future with that belief. And of course, the future can interfere with what Peirce called the smooth working of a belief habit and cause me to revise my belief habit. But nonetheless, when we believe P, we commit ourselves to acting on it. We also commit ourselves to P's being put in place by a method that, as Peirce says, is not extraneous to the facts, or, as Ramsey says, is caused by the way things are. A belief can't be adopted merely because it makes me feel more comfortable or makes my life go better. So the pragmatist account of truth that Peirce and Ramsey adopt, notice, is shot through already with norms. We commit ourselves to a number of things when we believe that something is true. Oliver Wendell Holmes, Jr., the eminent Supreme Court Justice, who had also been a member of that metaphysical club with Peirce and James and Wright, reminisces in 1929. Chauncey Wright, even in Holmes' times, he was a nearly forgotten philosopher. Chauncey Wright, a nearly forgotten philosopher of real merit, taught me when young that I must not say necessary about the universe, that we don't know whether anything is necessary or not. I believe that we can bet on the behavior of the universe in its contact with us. So I describe myself as a betabilitarian. Ramsey, I suggest, returns pragmatism to its origins in the metaphysical club, to the founding days when Peirce and Wright spoke about how having a belief is taking a bet on the future. What kind of bets might we take on the future? Well, we've heard that Ramsey bets every time he turns on Bridge Street in a certain way, that the Cambridge Union is on Bridge Street without thinking about it all the time. The critical care physician, I suggest, bets that a certain treatment will save the patient. The politician bets that by stimulating the economy, more jobs will be created, and so on. These bets or beliefs will come with different probabilities attached, and it might be that, for instance, the critical care physician, faced with very low probabilities, places a warranted bet despite the fact that the patient dies. And that whole realm of partial belief was where Ramsey really excelled. Peirce didn't touch that area. The resulting position on truth is that if a belief were to be the best it could be, then it would be true. Ramsey says in another late paper called Theories that if our best theory has it that there's a truth of the matter about whether the back of some far-flung planet is made of green cheese or not, and the theory says that it's not made of green cheese, then it's not made of green cheese. Sentences about faraway objects, sentences about very small objects like theoretical entities in science, play a role in our system of belief, and so that system imparts meaning and truth values to them. Okay, that's the Peircean and Ramseyan view of truth. As I say, it's shot through with norms or commitments. And now I'm going to talk about a different kind of norm, the beautiful and the just and the good. In the American Pragmatists, book that was mentioned in the introduction, I showed how the classical pragmatists were naturalists committed to not begging the question against ethics and politics as being a part of the inquiry aimed at truth. In fact, I think this is just an essential part of what it is to be a pragmatist. You don't set things up so that only science passes the tests, only science aims at truth. And that's why in that book I suggested that despite the fact that Quine took his pragmatist epistemology wholesale from his teacher C.I. Lewis, you probably can't call him a pragmatist, because he notoriously thought that any belief about ethics was just, it's just a mess, you can't tell. Right? So I've hinted already that Ramsey shares this position that value, generality, chance, etc., might be part of the natural world with the classical pragmatists. Here, I want to ask whether Ramsey's naturalism, in particular, leaves room for ethical and aesthetic judgments. Perhaps one also bets that it's right to treat strangers with respect. Perhaps one also bets that it's right to refrain from cheating on one's taxes. Perhaps one also bets that it's right to support local and international charities. Can we make sense of this idea on the pragmatist Ramseyan account of truth? On April 29th, 1921, Ramsey and his friend Richard Braithwaite were elected brand new undergraduate members of the Moral Sciences Club in Cambridge. One of the very first papers the following year asked whether truth and beauty are human inventions. This was a topic that would interest Ramsey for the rest of his short life, although it's a topic that hardly ever surfaces in Ramsey scholarship. Here, too, it turns out that he is in perfect step with the Peircean pragmatist, careful to not from the start rule out moral and aesthetic beliefs as being aimed at truth and evaluable in terms of how they cash out in action. But also, like Peirce, he didn't think it was obvious that beliefs about ethics and aesthetics did aim at truth. So Peirce called logic a normative science, along with ethics and aesthetics. It's not based on what our cognitive goals happen to be, but on what they ought to be. Again, it's shot through with norms. Logic is all about evaluating belief or habits of reasoning. This idea that logic is a normative science resonated with Ramsey. And Ramsey walked into a Cambridge that was full of the idea that logic isn't a normative science, it's a tautological science. Right? So this was a very non-standard view that he had picked up from Peirce. So Ramsey's very first words in the introduction to that book manuscript are as follows. It is a commonplace that logic, aesthetics, and ethics have a peculiar position among the sciences. Whereas all other sciences are concerned with the description and explanation of what happens, these three normative studies aim not at description, but criticism. To account for our actual conduct is the duty of the psychologist. The logician, the critic, and the moralist tell us not how we do, but how we ought to think, feel, and act. The logician, though, he says, doesn't have exclusive purchase on the question of how we should think for each science, logic, science, morality, ethics, must answer for its own domain, Ramsey says, the question, what is true? Ramsey thinks that the whole purpose The whole purpose of argument is to arrive at truth. And his project is to give us a holist account of how the truth predicate ranges over all of our beliefs, at least all of those beliefs with a claim to being truth apt. Again, like Peirce, Ramsey wants it both ways. He thinks that the normative sciences are also definable in ordinary, factual, natural terms. This project of seeing how genuine norms might come out of natural human practices is at the very heart of the pragmatist project. Of course, the big question, to slightly modify Hume's point, is whether we really can get an ought from an is. Can the naturalist, who eschews transcendental concepts such as God, what is rational with a capital R, Platonic forms, etc., can that naturalist really make sense of the genuinely normative? Ramsey tells us that since psychologists grossly neglect the aspects of their subject which are most important to the logician, philosophers have to take up some of that work. But whoever undertakes it must see that the three normative sciences, again, ethics, aesthetics, and logic, begin with psychological investigations, which lead up, in each case, to a valuation. It's very interesting as well. That's exactly the word that C.I. Lewis, at around the same time, was using in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And there's very little, no evidence that Ramsey knew any of Lewis's ethical work, although he certainly knew Lewis's logical work. An attribution of one of the three values, good, beautiful, or rational, predicates which appear not to be definable in terms of any of the concepts used in psychology or positive science. I say appear because it is one of the principal problems of philosophy to discover whether this is really the case, whether, that is to say, good, beautiful, rational, or for that matter, true, represent undefinable qualities. And sometimes Ramsey scratches out beautiful. He notes that we might get different answers for the different sciences of value. For instance, he says that whereas goodness and beauty could be defined in terms of our desires and admirations, rationality introduced some new element peculiar to logic, such as indefinable probability relations. But this really doesn't appeal to Ramsey. He's dead set against taking any key philosophical concept like goodness, Moore, G.E. Moore, propositions, Russell, or probability relations, Keynes, as unanalyzable or mysterious or undefinable. So he doesn't find this at all attractive. And he thinks that the arguments are so similar in all fields that they should hold or not hold for every kind of value. And at one point, as I say, he crosses out beauty, wavering about whether it indeed is part of our natural yet evaluable body of knowledge. And that seems perfectly right. If any judgment is not evaluable or aimed at truth, it might be judgments of aesthetic value. So just as if I say, chocolate ice cream is better than vanilla ice cream, and you say, no, vanilla ice cream's better, well, maybe there we have a dispute that isn't aimed at the truth. It's just about matters of taste. Maybe beauty and aesthetics is just like that. It's not aimed at truth. So Ramsey died in the middle of writing this book manuscript, and the contemporary Ramseyan has to fill in some gaps. We get some complicated help from a short and snappy paper that Ramsey read in 1925 to the Apostles, titled On There Being No Discussable Subject. Now, while the Moral Sciences Club was, and remains, a serious business, the Apostles, or meetings of the Apostles, were, and perhaps still are, it's a secret society, we don't know for sure, they were marked by irreverence. And this poses some interpretive challenges. In Russell's words, the group held to the principle there were to be no taboos, no limitations, no barriers to absolute speculation. The group would choose a topic, and in a subsequent meeting, a member would present a short paper on that topic, often provocatively and cheekily titled. And after a debate, a vote would be taken. And that vote might or might not be on the question addressed in the paper. It could be on, like you read the minutes of the Apostles' book, and it could be green or blue. That's the vote. Completely unconnected with the topic of the paper. So there are some interpretive challenges. But in this Apostles' paper, Ramsey explores the idea that there is no longer any subject suitable for discussion. He runs through the arguments that were in the air in favor of that idea, that there is no subject suitable for discussion. One is that the conclusion of the greatest modern philosopher is that there is no such subject as philosophy. That's Wittgenstein, right? That it is an activity, not a doctrine, and that instead of answering questions, it aims merely at curing headaches. There goes philosophy as a subject matter for discussion, courtesy of Wittgenstein. He then notes that in a recent paper read to the Apostles of Russell's, Russell put forward a philosophy of nature based entirely on logic and the physical sciences, discussable only by those with considerable technical expertise. Out go the sciences as discussable matters. Russell also put forward a philosophy of value based on what men desire. Ramsey then delivers the following striking thought, which I suggest has misled everyone. Most of us would agree that the objectivity of good was a thing we had settled and dismissed with the existence of God. Theology and absolute ethics are two famous subjects which we have realized to have no real objects. Out, it seems, go religion and ethics. Although, note here, so Ramsey was very happy to see religion go out the door. He was an arch atheist. But notice that it's absolute ethics that goes out the door. And for Ramsey, absolute everything goes out the door, because remember, he's a pragmatist about truth. Philosophers have taken this passage, though, to constitute a straightforward endorsement of emotivism, the view that ethical sentences or beliefs do not express genuine propositions, but rather emotional attitudes, like saying boo, hiss at something you don't like. Emotivism was common enough in Cambridge in the 1920s, but Ramsey, I submit, was not enrolled in the program. And I know that I'm running short of time, so I'm going to skip over a little bit. And that bit is that one bit of evidence is that Ramsey himself was engaged in a considerable number of discussions about ethics and politics. For example, in 1928, he launched a major debate about intergenerational justice and argued that views on which we discount future generations' well-being are ethically indefensible. Another bit of evidence is that Ramsey worried about beauty, and if any discourse is reducible to what people happen to find desirable and is not discussable, then it's going to be those aesthetic judgments. There's one kind of belief, though, that Ramsey thought was in one respect unlike the rest of all of our beliefs. Those are beliefs about the meaning of life. And here he takes something important from Jamesian pragmatism. So Russell was famous in his 1903, The Free Man's Worship, for suggesting that science tells us that the world is purposeless and void of meaning. He says, man is the product of causes which had no prevision of the end they were achieving. His origin, his growth, his hopes and fears, his loves and his beliefs are but the outcome of accidental, that's a misprint. I think it's bumping together of atoms. No fire, no heroism, no intensity of thought and feeling can preserve an individual life beyond the grave. All the labors of the ages, all the devotion, all the inspiration, all the noonday brightness of human genius are destined to extinction in the vast death of the solar system, and the whole temple of man's achievement must inevitably be buried beneath the debris of a universe in ruins. Only within the scaffolding of these truths, only on the firm foundation of unyielding despair, can the soul's habitation henceforth be safely built. Bit depressing. But Russell actually was trying to forge an ethical position for atheists. He thought that if you were going to avoid this despair, you should worship goodness, not science and not a false god. Ramsey, as I've said, was just as much a non-believer as Russell, also in search of a way of understanding morality and the meaning of life in a godless scientific world. In his Apostles paper, Ramsey's not just objecting to Wittgenstein, he's the most famous philosopher in the world, he's also objecting to Russell here. Just before he delivers the passage that has struck so many as being a commitment to emotivism, he says of Russell, of course, his main statement about value might be disputed. I've suggested in this paper very briefly that Ramsey does indeed dispute the statement that the good is just what men desire. He's clearly got it in as a normative science. He doesn't cross out good ever, he crosses out beauty sometimes, but the good is something that we can inquire into and we can aim at truth in these inquiries. But he has a different view about the meaning of life. He ends this paper by telling us where he seems to differ from some of my friends, Wittgenstein, Russell. And it's worth quoting him in full. A bit hard to see. My picture of the world is drawn in perspective and not like a model to scale. The foreground is occupied by human beings, and the stars are all as small as threepenny bits. I don't really believe in astronomy, except as a complicated description of part of the course of human and possibly animal sensation. I apply my perspective not merely to space, but also to time. In time, the world will cool, and everything will die. But that is a long time off still, and its present value at compound discount is almost nothing. Nor is the present less valuable because the future will be blank. Humanity, which fills the foreground of my picture, I find interesting and on the whole admirable. I find, just now at least, the world a pleasant and exciting place. You may find it depressing. And that you is both Russell in The Free Man's Worship, but also Wittgenstein, who is a bit of a depressive sourpuss. Remember, he's distinguishing himself from his friends, he says. I am sorry for you, and you despise me, but I have reason, and you have none. You would only have a reason for despising me if your feeling corresponded to the fact in a way mine didn't. But neither can correspond to the fact. The fact is not in itself good or bad. It's just that it thrills me but depresses you. On the other hand, I pity you with reason because it's pleasanter to be thrilled than to be depressed, and not merely pleasanter, but better for all one's activities. It's such a wonderful passage. Of course, Ramsey believed in astronomy, right? I don't really believe in astronomy, he says. His suggestion is that it's pointless dwelling on the fact that our planet will cool and die and concluding that there's no meaning in life. At the end of the last sentence, Ramsey wrote and then struck out, which go more smoothly. So it is better to be optimistic than depressed, as our activities will go more smoothly. So one dimension, he's saying here, of the evaluation of some of our beliefs, those about the meaning of life, might involve a Jamesian kind of consequence? Does it make my life go smoothly? Do the benefits of taking a positive attitude towards life in light of the meaning we create outweigh the benefits of being miserable about life in light of finding no higher transcendent purpose? Ramsey says yes. What this means is that for some classes of our beliefs, Jamesian consequences for one's life are relevant after all. Here is how Richard Braithwaite ends his obituary of his dear friend, and they were contemporaries, came up Cambridge together. Unlike many intellects, his had not been garnered into print, and the best of his mind is utterly destroyed. Such an event would lead us to question the purpose or the meaning of life, had not Frank Ramsey taught us that these are nonsense questions. This is a lovely way to end an obituary, right? I mean, what a great juxtaposition. But a more accurate representation of what Ramsey really thought would seem to be this. Beliefs about the purpose and the meaning of life aren't nonsense questions. They must be sensitive to what makes life go best for me and for humanity as a whole. So Ramsey, I think, provides us with a pragmatism that takes the best of Peirce. Your belief had better be connected to the way things are, if it's a belief about the world, and the best of James. But beliefs that are about the meaning of life had better be connected in the right kind of way to what makes life go better, what makes life go more smoothly. Thank you.